Okay, so picture this. You're scrolling through your feed and bam, there's a photo of your grandma skydiving. Now, you probably think, whoa, grandma's a total badass.
Hmm.
But then you remember, wait a minute, she's 90 and terrified of heights. That, my friend, is probably a deep fake. And it kind of highlights a huge issue we're facing these days. We're living in a world where seeing is no longer believing.
What's really fascinating is just how easy it's become to create these fakes. It used to be, Hollywood-level
Hmm.
technology. And now, well, anyone with a smartphone and a bit of free time can whip one up. And that's a problem because it really erodes that foundation of trust in what we see online. And that has huge, huge implications.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And that's exactly why we're diving into this whole thing today. So how can we possibly know what's real in a world that's practically flooded with fakes? But hey, there's good news too. There are people out there fighting back, coming up with some seriously ingenious solutions.
It's like this constant arms race. On one side, you've got the fakers getting better and better at creating these realistic-looking images and videos. And then on the other side, you've got researchers and companies developing increasingly sophisticated tools to detect and verify authenticity.
So where do we even begin with all of this? Let's start with something I stumbled upon that I thought was really interesting. Metadata. Apparently, every digital image has these hidden clues embedded within it. It's like a secret code revealing all about how the image was created.
Exactly. It's called EXIF data, and it contains a ton of information. Think camera model, timestamp, even GPS coordinates. It's a really valuable starting point for authentication. If someone claims a photo was taken in Paris, but the metadata says, nope, this was actually taken in New York, that's a pretty big red flag right there.
Hmm, that makes sense. But couldn't a really clever faker just change the metadata?
You're absolutely right. Metadata can definitely be altered. But think of it as like the first line of defense. It's not completely foolproof, but it gives us a solid starting point. Plus, there are tools out there that make it a lot harder to tamper with this data.
Oh, interesting. Like what kind of tools?
Well, imagine this. A photojournalist can actually prove their photo hasn't been tampered with because the original metadata, like the time and location it was taken, is locked in using software like Photo Mechanic. That's really powerful evidence, especially in situations where the integrity of an image is absolutely crucial.
Okay, that makes sense. So metadata is definitely helpful, but not the be-all and end-all solution. What about solutions that are, get this, actually built into cameras? I read that some companies are doing this, which sounds super futuristic to me.
It is pretty futuristic. We're talking about hardware authentication here. Companies like Nikon, Canon, and Sony are starting to embed these digital signatures right onto the camera sensor. It's like giving each photo a unique birth certificate created at the very moment of capture.
Wow, so you're saying you could actually trace a photo back to the specific camera that took it?
Exactly. And get this, this is already being rolled out in some cameras, like Sony Alpha 9 through a third, through firmware updates. It's not just a concept for the future, it's happening right now.
That's seriously impressive.
Yeah.
But what about solutions that don't rely on specific hardware? What about something like blockchain? I mean, everyone's talking about blockchain these days, but how does it actually help with image authentication? I'll be honest, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
All right, so imagine a giant public notebook where every single entry is permanent and can't be erased, ever. That's essentially what blockchain is. And when it comes to images, platforms are using this technology to create a tamper-proof record of an image's creation and also any changes that are made to it along the way.
That's starting to make a little more sense. So if someone tries to alter an image that's been recorded on a blockchain, those changes would be immediately obvious, right?
Yeah. Precisely. Because every single modification is tracked and logged on this public ledger. Anyone can see that the image has been tampered with. And that makes it way harder for someone to try and pass off a fake as the real deal.
So with blockchain, you're basically creating this digital chain of custody for an image. That's pretty amazing. Do you have any like real world examples of platforms actually using this technology?
No, absolutely. There's provenance proof, for one. It's helping artists and photographers prove the authenticity of their work using, you guessed it, blockchain. Think about it. A photographer wants to sell these limited edition prints. By recording the details of each print on a blockchain, they can actually provide buyers with undeniable proof that the print is genuine and hasn't been duplicated.
That's huge for artists, especially these days, trying to protect their work in this digital age. But let's be real, isn't everything hackable these days? Are there any vulnerabilities in these blockchain systems that, could be exploited by fakers?
That's a great question, and it's a really common concern. Blockchain is designed to be incredibly secure, with all these layers of cryptography and decentralization. But just like any system, it's not totally foolproof. There have been some instances where blockchain platforms have been targeted, sure, but generally speaking, the underlying technology itself remains extremely resilient.
So it's not perfect, but it's definitely a major step forward in the fight for digital authenticity. But this still relies on someone actually taking the initiative to use these tools, right?
Yeah.
What about solutions that can like automatically detect fakes? Is that even possible?
It is, and this is where things get really interesting. We're basically using AI to fight fire with fire. Researchers are developing what are called Jan fingerprints. So every AI image generator, those algorithms that create deepfakes, they actually leave behind these subtle, almost invisible quirks in the images they produce. It's like a digital signature, totally unique to each AI model.
Wait, so you're saying we can analyze an image and figure out which specific AI created it?
That's the goal. Yep. And as AI image generators are getting more and more sophisticated, well, so are the tools for detecting them. It's like this constant cat and mouse game. But it's a game we're starting to win, I think.
Wow. This is mind-blowing stuff.
Mhm.
But with all this talk about technology, I can't help but wonder about the human element.
Hmm.
What role does critical thinking play in all of this?
That's a really crucial point. Technology is this incredibly powerful tool, no doubt. But it's not a silver bullet. We can't just rely solely on algorithms to solve this problem. We also need to develop our own, what I like to call BS detectors, that ability to critically evaluate what we're seeing online.
So it's not just about having the right tools, it's about knowing how to use them and being aware of that potential for manipulation.
You got it. It's about asking those questions, being a little skeptical, and not taking everything at face value. Where did this image come from? Who created it? What's the context? These are simple questions, yeah, but they can make a huge difference in how we interpret information.
I see your point. But doesn't this put a lot of responsibility on the average person? How realistic is it to expect everyone to become like a digital detective?
It's definitely a challenge, no doubt about it, but I really believe it's an essential skill for navigating the digital world. Think about it. We already do this in other areas of our lives all the time. We're skeptical of salespeople, right? We double check information before making big decisions. It's just about applying that same critical thinking to the online world.
Okay, that's a good point. So it's not about becoming some expert in digital forensics. It's about being more mindful and questioning what we see online.
Exactly. And it's a skill that can absolutely be developed and honed over time. The more we practice that critical thinking, the better we become at spotting those red flags and avoiding potential deception.
That makes sense. But I gotta admit, it's a little overwhelming. It feels like we're constantly bombarded with information these days. And it's hard to know what to actually trust.
I totally get that feeling. It's easy to feel powerless when you're faced with all this digital manipulation. But I really want to emphasize that we're not powerless. We have the ability to fight back.
So how do we do that? What can we actually do?
First and foremost, be mindful of the sources you trust. Stick to reputable news outlets, websites, and social media accounts. Be wary of those sensational headlines or content that just seems too good to be true.
So it's about being more discerning about where we get our information.
Yeah.
Don't just blindly trust anything that pops up in our feed.
Exactly. And when you come across an image or a video that seems even a little bit questionable, don't just passively consume it. Take a moment to pause and question it. Apply that critical thinking we were talking about.
Like what kind of questions? Give us some examples.
Ask yourself, who created this? What might their motives be? Is there any way to actually verify the authenticity of this content?
Oh, so it's about activating our inner skeptic. Even in those like casual moments
Yeah.
of scrolling.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to do a little digging. A simple reverse image search can often reveal whether an image has been manipulated or taken out of context.
You mean like uploading an image to Google Images and seeing where else it pops up online?
Exactly. It's a quick and easy way to check for any inconsistencies or red flags. And if you're really serious about verifying an image, there are also websites that specialize in this digital forensics. They can analyze an image for signs of manipulation or tampering.
Wow, so there's this whole world of digital detective work we can do. It's empowering to know that we're not completely defenseless.
Absolutely. And remember, it's not just about protecting ourselves, it's about protecting our communities as well.
What do you mean by that?
If you come across a piece of content that you believe is fake or misleading, don't just ignore it, report it. Social media platforms and news outlets rely on users to flag problematic content.
So it's like a neighborhood watch for the digital world, huh?
Yeah,
We all have this responsibility to look out for each other and keep the online space safe.
you said it. It's a collective effort. By working together, we can create a more trustworthy and transparent digital world.
Okay, that's a powerful message. It's not about surrendering to the chaos. It's about actively shaping the future of digital authenticity. But there's one thing we haven't really touched on yet, the legal side of things. What are some of the legal challenges surrounding all of this?
That's a great point. As the lines between real and fake are becoming more and more blurred, lawmakers around the world are really grappling with how to regulate this new digital reality.
So we've talked about how to spot these fakes, how technology is fighting back, and the importance of critical thinking. But where does the law even fit into all of this? It feels like uncharted territory.
You're right. It's a really rapidly evolving area. As deepfakes and other forms of digital manipulation are becoming more and more sophisticated, well, the law is kind of struggling to keep up, to be honest. One of the biggest challenges is just like defining what even constitutes a fake.
Yeah, I could see how that would be tricky. It's not always black and white, right?
Exactly. It's like, where do you draw the line between creative editing and just outright deception? And then there's the question of intent, too. Was this manipulation done to mislead people? Or was it for, like, artistic purposes? Like a filmmaker using CGI in a movie. The law really has to differentiate between those situations.
Right, and I imagine the global nature of the internet makes things even more complicated. Like, whose laws even apply when a deepfake is created in one country but then shared worldwide?
Oh, that's another huge hurdle, jurisdiction. The internet doesn't really have geographical boundaries, so it's difficult to determine which laws apply and who even has the authority to enforce them. But even with all those challenges, we are seeing some progress, thankfully.
Really? What kind of progress are we talking about?
Well, several countries have started enacting, or at least considering, laws specifically aimed at deepfakes, especially those used for harmful purposes like spreading misinformation or damaging someone's reputation.
Can you give us some examples of what those laws actually look like?
Absolutely. In the U.S., California's been kind of a front runner in this area. They have a law that specifically bans the distribution of non-consensual deepfake pornography. And they also have another law making it illegal to use deepfakes to deceive voters in elections.
So they're focusing on those areas where deepfakes pose like a clear and present danger to individuals and society as a whole.
Exactly. It's about addressing the most harmful applications of this technology. And then on a broader scale, the European Union is considering regulations as part of its AI Act, which would require platforms to actually label AI-generated content, including deepfakes.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Transparency seems like such a key part of the solution here.
It is, for sure. The hope is that by clearly labeling AI-generated content, people will be more aware of the potential for manipulation and therefore less likely to be deceived.
It all sounds good in theory, but I can't help but wonder, like, how do you actually enforce these laws in this vast and ever-changing world of the internet? It seems like such a daunting task.
It is a challenge, yeah, but not an insurmountable one, I think. There are a few different approaches being considered. One is to hold platforms accountable for the content they host.
So, like, making social media companies and websites responsible for taking down deepfakes, or at least labeling them appropriately.
Exactly. That basically puts the onus on the platforms to take those proactive measures. Another approach is to invest in even better detection tools.
Like those GAN fingerprints we were talking about earlier.
Yep, exactly. As those technologies continue to improve, they can be used not only to expose deepfakes, but also potentially to gather evidence for legal action.
So it's kind of a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
Legislation, platform responsibility, and technological innovation all working together.
You got it. And it's important to remember that laws and technologies are only part of the solution. We also need to focus on education and awareness as well.
We keep coming back to that, huh? That human element.
It's just so crucial. Empowering people to be critical thinkers and informed consumers of information, that's paramount. It's about fostering this culture of digital literacy where people are equipped to question what they see, to demand that transparency, and to hold creators accountable.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation. I mean, we've covered so much ground, from the technical intricacies of metadata to the ethical dilemmas of AI-generated content, and now the complex legal landscape. It's clear that digital authenticity is a multifaceted issue with, no easy answers.
You've captured it perfectly. It's complex, absolutely, but it's a conversation we absolutely need to have. The very integrity of our digital world is at stake here.
But what gives me hope is that we're not powerless in this. We have the technology, the legal frameworks are developing, and most importantly, I think, we have the will to tackle this challenge head on.
I completely agree. By staying informed, questioning what we see, and demanding that accountability, we can all play a part in shaping a more trustworthy and authentic digital future.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of digital authenticity. It's been a fascinating and thought-provoking journey.
The pleasure was all mine. Until next time.